Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Books Closed. I am Andrew Stortz, and if you're new here, if you haven't heard this show yet, it's about tattooing, plain and simple. I've had the opportunity to speak to many of the greatest tattooers who are currently part of the craft today, and a wide array of topics have been covered, and we like to talk about what it means to us to be tattooers and beyond. So, welcome, if you are new here. This episode, I got to talk to tattooer Sharky, who works at Classic Tattoo in San Marcos, Texas. I first came across Sharky on social media a couple of years ago, where she was posting interviews that she was conducting through Instagram Live with a lot of greats. And it just took seeing one of her interviews to really identify her passion and drive for tattooing, and also the vast history of the industry. It's been a bit since she streamed any of those interviews, but she has just started again making a new show with tattooer Rich Phi, who is from New York City. And they call their show Welcome to the Back Room, and they stream it on their Instagram Lives every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. So I will definitely link to both of their pages in the show notes if you're interested in checking out some of those conversations. They're having different guests on all the time, and it's a good time. So I recommend checking it out. But as far as this episode and this show goes, we recorded it in mid-February, right as Texas was experiencing that crazy winter storm. It was unprecedented, and it left a lot of people in the state without power and access to food, and it was a mess because Texas is not a state that seems to me like they would be very prepared for winter weather. So amidst all that, I had seen a post that Sharky made on the internet about how her travels and trips and adventures in the past had left her feeling more than prepared and more than content sitting in her non-electricity filled house for however long that lasted. And she was just more or less talking about all the skills of survival and problem solving that she had learned over the years through just putting herself in seemingly uncomfortable situations and making it work. So I thought it'd be the perfect time to talk to her about just that, as well as other tat stuff. And we also got to talk a bit about her friendship with Lyle Tuttle over the years. That's towards the end of the interview. It was tough because I didn't anticipate the fact that our internet connection together would be totally terrible. So we had a huge delay and cutting out, and we're constantly asking each other to repeat ourselves, and I was worried that it wasn't going to be salvageable or listenable. But with a little elbow grease in the editing room, I think I was able to put this together in a way that you're really going to enjoy listening. And I probably could have tricked you all to think that it wasn't technically difficult, but either way, before we start with Sharky, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by a tattoo shop, and they are hiring. So if you are a tattooer and you are looking for a job, then please listen up, because Priestess is one of Pacific Northwest's premier piercing and tattoo studios with 5 locations in the state of Orgeon. They operate high-volume shops, providing their tattoo clientele with both walk-in and custom work. They're looking for artists that are interested in working in a safe and all-inclusive environment, and they're willing to compensate or assist in relocation fees for serious candidates. If you are an outdoor enthusiast, Orgeon will not disappoint. Head over to highpriestess.com for more information about the shop, and when you're ready to inquire about the job, send a DM on Instagram to @RestTattooer, and you can talk to Rest about the specifics. If you're looking to relocate, or if you're already located in Oregon and you just need a new job, this could be the one for you. Orgeon, I feel like people who live there probably say Oregon. I always said Oregon when I was a kid, and I played Oregon Trail because living in the East Coast, Oregon felt like it was a million miles away. Anyway, yeah. Let's get started with the episode. What do you say? Here is my conversation from mid-February that I had with Sharky.
Oh, yeah. So what a shit show this has been. So I put up that post because the weather here wasn't actually bad. It was really mild, but Texas isn't prepared for any of this. And it wasn't until the second day that I even realized that people were dying Like, from, honestly, I mean, it's probably too soon to laugh about it, but people were dying because they didn't know how to keep themselves warm for one night. And that's what ended up prompting the post, was because often the way that I choose to live is highly scrutinized and made fun of and seen as being very eccentric. Whereas, my transient lifestyle is, literally the direct link into how I ended up becoming a tattooer anyway. And, I just seem like the crazy person shaking their fist on the mountain saying, like, it's all going to crumble. It's all going to burn. You're all going to die. And they're like, sure thing, kid. And then it was happening around me. And I'm like, I'm sitting here in my house, comfortably warm, drinking coffee, cooking sausages, playing with my dog. And there's 100-car pileup down the street. Like, how did you guys end up here? How did you end up in a space where after one evening of no heat or water, less than 24 hours, you died? Are you not maybe a little too dependent upon these outside sources that have proven time and time again throughout history that they are not good unless you're a rich person?
I mean, that is kind of crazy. After one night, it kind of all went sideways like that. Because being up here in Maine, I think we're all pretty used to not having power or water or whatever it may be for a day, 2 days, sometimes more. And it definitely sucks, but I'm sure we're way more set up to adapt to it than a place like Texas, where you guys don't really get weather like this very often.
Yeah, and I mean, for the record, I'm not fucking from here. So I'm from the tri-state. So, these people have always seemed rather strange to me. And it was just like tripled down this past weekend. These people will strap a fucking saddle on a tornado and ride it down 35 like nothing is going on. But there was like, the temperature dropped 10 degrees and they just all started dying. And so, it's kind of strange to observe.
So let's talk about, as you described, your eccentric lifestyle. I don't know if you would consider it that because it's your lifestyle. But what do people say about it? Well, actually, first, let's talk about what is this lifestyle that we're alluding to as far as your traveling goes and the way that you structure your work scheduling and stuff like that.
So I have always been transient. So you're right about, or what I think I heard you say about it, people considering it eccentric, but it is, an actual lifestyle. As a kid, my parents divorced early, so we probably moved 5 or 6 times before I was 18. And then from 18 to now 38, I just turned 38 last week, so that's like 20 years. I've probably moved 15 times. And even now here, when I moved to work to Classic Tattoo in San Marcos, I moved here almost 6 years ago. This town is probably like 10 square miles and I've moved 3 times. So people view that and they're like, what is wrong with you? But for me, it feels very strange to be locked into one place at one time because you become very dependent upon it. And my independence is very important to me. So I'm always kind of on the go. And as far as working that into my tattoo schedule, it's literally the reason I became a tattooer. I'm not one of these tattooers that's like, I was an artist my whole life and then I realized that I had to do it on skin. Like, I was a transient hardcore metal kid getting tattooed in New York and getting heavily tattooed and, was working as a floor girl in the shop. And you know how that story goes. It just tumbles down. And I soon realized, like, these motherfuckers are moving all the time. This isn't like bartending at TGI Fridays like I was where, if I don't show up for a shift, I get fired. These motherfuckers leave for a month and they're almost rewarded for it. It seemed like perhaps this might be the place that I should be. And because of my attitude towards life and wanting to be around rough and tumble individuals, it just kind of all connected. And that's how I ended up getting into traditional tattooing anyway. So this lifestyle, I owe it to my great love of tattooing that has taken over my entire existence, my whole life.
Yeah, I can relate not as much to the transient part, but to kind of seeing tattooing like in the real world, growing up, like listening to heavier music and stuff like that. That's kind of what introduced me to tattoo stuff as well. And then you kind of peel back the layers and see what it all means, what it all could mean for your life. And I think that's pretty exciting for a lot of people. So as far as you moving around so much, is like, how does that affect like personal relationships, friends? Do you feel like you're apprehensive to get too close to anybody at any point because you're always you're going to have your one foot out the door at any point? Or
the people that I'm close to are similarly minded than me, so they are okay with the fact, like, hey, if I don't see you or talk to you for 3 months, doesn't mean you're dead, doesn't mean you don't love me. It just means that you're doing you, and we'll meet on the other side. But as far as like someone that I have to come home to and greet, and that just doesn't work for me, because besides the moving around a lot, I'm a fucking shop goblin. I'm always there. If I'm not tattooing, I'm painting. If I'm not painting, I'm scrubbing tubes. I'm the shop manager. I'm doing guest spots. Like, who has time to fuck in that scenario? I don't. And if I do, I don't have time to fuck and talk to you. It's just impossible. Like, I've given up on it. It's fine.
With friendships, I don't know, I feel like I've lost touch with a lot of friends because tattooing kind of consumed a lot of my time, and all the things I do are like this, where I'm like in a dark room in my basement talking to someone on Zoom for an hour or two. But like, I don't know, there's always the people who are kind of more needy. Well, they'll be offended if you're not like checking in on them and stuff. And I feel like those people kind of fall to the wayside because it's hard to cater to friendships like that in my life. Have you found it hard to have like a solid group of friends over the years because you have moved around so much?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've fallen into that hole where all of my friends are essentially tattooers. And you promise yourself you're not going to be that person when you start, but they're typically tattooers, musicians, photographers, these are the kind of people who tend to understand that. But friends that I had previous to this, there's really only 2 or 3 that can tolerate the way that I navigate through life. And that's just something that you learn and come to accept. There's no hard feelings. Friendships have shelf lives. That's just a natural part of this cycle of life. But, it's like a walk-in. I'm not going to let you sell me on some shit that I'm not willing to do. So if you need me to be more attentive to you in our friendship, I can't provide it. I'm not going to do it. And you could leave and find somebody down the street who could do it better for you.
Yeah. And I guess it's all about just setting those boundaries. So you don't feel like you don't feel bummed that you're letting someone down, because you kind of just know the parameters that you want to operate within. And then everyone can kind of just fall in line or like you said, just go elsewhere to find what they need, whether it's personal life or work life or whatever it may be. So that's probably a pretty good approach, I would imagine, for anybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're married to tattooing.
Sometimes too much.
Maybe.
But yeah, let's talk about some of your travels. As far as trips you've done, I think you said you like train trips and stuff. What were some of your earlier times where you really felt the freedom of just not conforming to like the structure of life that is socially accepted?
When I came out here to Texas, kind of my first thing that I decided I needed to do was buy a fucking motorcycle. It's like the modern horse. So I got a motorcycle. I taught myself how to ride. I failed miserably several times. But once I figured out how to keep it up on 2 wheels and go, I was like, I'm going to fucking go to New Mexico in the wintertime and, ride up the mountain and go get that Tao's tattoo. And probably when I got about 300 miles away and I realized, all right, I'm on the highway. I have a gas canister strapped to my back with my tattoo machines and like 2 bottles of pigment and a couple of pairs of underwear. Like, what am I, what am I doing? And I was like, okay, it's whatever. I'm in it now. Like, I got to keep doing it. And that particular trip ended up kind of changing my life, because it ended up being like, instead of this pleasure trip, it ended up being a survival trip, and it was all surrounded by tattooing, but there ended up being a blizzard while I was out there, and I was by myself. And at one point in the trip, I ended up dropping the bike, and these people saw me on the road, and they were like, "What?" And this is like the middle of nowhere. Like, "What are you doing, kid?" And I was like, I'm just trying to get to the next town. And they're like, the next town's like 50 miles away. You're not going to make it. And I ended up getting in contact with this truck driver named Dino, who was just this rad dude with a big beard. And he offered me a ride to town and strapped the bike on there. And there was just these wild experiences in this 2-week time course that I was on the bike. And when it was over, I was so much more confident, not just in my ability to take on any situation as it comes, but it made it hard to be nervous for tattoos as well. When I realized I had probably almost died 2 weeks prior to that, someone asking me for something that was a little over my head, it didn't feel so strange to do it. So, and it often correlates like that when you're, I don't know. I feel like as tattooers, whenever we watch someone crafting something that seems very difficult, we're able to relate it to our work. There was that documentary that came out about that sushi chef, and it was like, oh, that's like tattooing, and that sommelier, like all that stuff. So it's the same thing when you're traveling. It's like this other love, this other craft, this other passion that you're actively involved in that requires your full attention, your full dedication in order to make it through. And very similarly to a tattoo, you cannot stop in the middle of it and throw it in the garbage. You have to follow it through. So it all ends up coming full circle and allowing me to be a more well-rounded tattooer, and live a life that I feel is full. I feel a lot of fullness in my life. I don't really want for much, and I have less. And that's something that took a long time to get to.
I mean, that seems kind of like the dream, to not seek joy or fulfillment through material stuff, because that's never going to keep you fulfilled. It's really more about the experiences and stuff. And it's funny that you pointed out those parallels, because right at the beginning of your story, I was thinking exactly about the fact that traveling on a bike like that is so much like tattooing, in that once you're in it, it's too late to stop. So you kind of have to figure it out. And
yeah.
I'm not sure how many other parallels in life there are to that. I'm sure there are. I can't think of any offhand, but yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I always feel like stuff like that, like one area of your life will inform the others as you do it. So it's so beneficial to have experiences and interests outside of tattooing. And then when you come back to work, you feel so pumped up, like you just went to a convention and saw your favorite tattooer working for the first time or something, but it's just totally unrelated. I've always thought that was interesting.
Yes, I heard most of that. I missed the last part about, it sounded like you say, like when your clients observe what you had done, but after that trailed off.
We're really killing it here.
We are. I mean, we're rocking hard, but I got to tell you, this is very much like my life on any other day. Like, of course, I have this opportunity to speak to you and my internet isn't working, but I'm going to see it through all the way. And if it's not good, then we can do it again another day.
I know, it's like all this time, and I pick like the 1 week where it's the worst weather situation. I didn't honestly realize it was that bad until I wrote to you and you sent me all that stuff back, and I was like, holy shit, this is actually real and like affecting a huge amount of people.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't realize how bad it was because of how not bad it was. Like, you're seeing it on the news. I was talking to my mom about it, and she's like, oh yeah, I saw it on the news. And I kept thinking, like, are they showing footage of like the first hour of it? Like, when are they going to show what it looks like now? Because it looks like it's just regularly snowing. And it was a regular dusting of snow and ice, but there are no winter municipal facilities here. There is no snowplow. There is no salt truck. Nobody has a scraper for those things don't exist. So very quickly, it was thrown into mass pandemonium. People were running their cars, in their homes and dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. People were lighting fires inside of their house, not connecting the thought that, like, the only way that you can do that is with a chimney. It was, I don't know. Texas is not looking so good right now. We're not looking so tough right now.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some like informative PSAs, but no one had power to watch TV anyway, so I don't even know what the answer would have been to get that information out to people.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I would encourage people to not rely on any kind of emergency grid, emergency like information. Everybody spends like, minimum 4 hours on their phone a day? Minimum? You could take 20 minutes of that time to download a map of your state and ask some basic questions like, what do I do with my food if I don't have a refrigerator? How do I light my house without a candle? If people took that amount of time, 1/8 of that amount of time per week to figure out how to sustain themselves in an emergency situation, something like this would have never happened. But people are just more apt to just like hit that scroll and just look at shit and go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So, I mean, maybe I'm being too harsh. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I think you're at a point where you've put a lot of time into the things that you're preaching now, so it makes sense that you would feel this way about it. So if we look back now...
There we go. No, I hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So if we look back, I'm curious as to, like, where do you think you get the confidence to kind of like go it alone in a sense, whether it's with your career or just with the other things that you choose to do? Because I feel like it's got to come from somewhere to feel that you can just march your own path in a sense.
I would say that, I would love to say I was born with it. But I think it probably just comes from observing my mother. My mother was a survivor. She's like toughest chick I know. And seeing that growing up. And also it's important to note that I have a younger brother who suffers from mental disabilities. So as soon as he was born, I was on my own. So at 7 years old, being the competent child, that meant that I was on my own. You can walk to school, you can make your own food, you can do your own thing. And then, amplify that by the fact that we would move a lot. Amplify that by the fact that I was in private school most of my life, like private Catholic schools, which are very strict and require much independence from you. Yeah, oof is right. Oof is right. So you put all that stuff together, by the time I was probably 12 or 13 years old, they had labeled me a flight risk. I was running away from home. I was like living in the woods with my boyfriend when I was young. I would do it all the time. So it was a natural progression through life. By the time 18 came and I was really on my own, I was already fully prepared to take that step. And it is only since, now, in the past 5 or 6 years, I have found a way to do this in a more positive way. Like there's less thrashing going on. Like it's not an overkill Exodus video going on with me running around in the background. Like now I've learned to kind of make it make sense and, make it positive so that now it's not just me being able to survive. Anybody who is near me benefits from the way that I live. I'm able to kind of share those things with people, and that's very new for me, but I'm happy to do it, and especially within the tattoo community. It's all very interconnected.
I feel like when you're younger, you can it's more about like running away and getting away from stuff or responsibility, and if you sustain that kind of activity, then it's got to evolve over time. Because you can't always just run forever. I mean, I guess you could, but it's not in your best interest necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It definitely was running away from things for a long time. But, for people who know me, they know that I'm like this hardcore Disney fan. And there's this saying in the Disney universe is that you can't run from trouble. There ain't no place that far. And when you consider that, you stop doing it. And you start reevaluating things, which is probably why I've stayed in this town, sans moving 3 times in it, for almost 6 years. There's no more need to run away. You just come to terms with who you are and your life, and you start thriving. It's sick.
So you're not going stir crazy yet?
Stir crazy? No way. I was in my fucking glory and it felt really bad. Like, as soon as I realized that I didn't need to leave the house for several days and there would be no electricity and no water, there was nobody happier than I was. Like, I brought all the camping gear inside and I was just in my glory. Like, yesterday the lights came on full time and I still kept them off. Like, I still wanted that stillness. But then I started hearing cars running up and down the road and I was like, great, all right, now we're back to this shit again.
It's funny that you got some sort of skill set from going to Catholic school growing up, and then it just pushed you directly into the dark arms of heavy metal.
It's almost as if that's what they wanted. When I sit back and think about it, I was like, I think the Catholic school may have been set up by Satan. There's no way that God has anything to do with that, because the second you leave, you're just like, it's just, ugh. It's terrible. But, I can dodge a ruler like nobody else. You can't hit me. I mean, it definitely teaches you some real sick moves.
It's another part of your diverse skill set that I didn't even know happened, but that makes sense. Yeah, Catholic school, you can either learn how to get your ass beat, depending on how old you are, or you can dodge the ruler.
Dude, you never know when it comes in handy.
Yeah. So where were you when you started tattooing then? And when was it exactly?
It'll be 11 years tattooing at the end of the month on the 28th. I started tattooing at Inner City Tattoo in Elizabeth, New Jersey, lovingly called Old Calcutta because it's fucking crazy out there. But, it was cool. I was the floor girl over at True Blue in Queens for a while, working under Vinny Signorelli. And at that time, that was like the heavy hitter spot. Michelle Tarantelli worked there. Hillary Fisher White worked there. Benny Smalls worked there. So being, the kid I was, being around that element, it was very infectious. And, as the floor girl, you end up understanding where the supplies come from. So I was like, I just have to go over to Unimax. I went down to Unimax, dressed like a little rascal, trying to pretend to be a big person in a fucking trench coat. And I'm like, I'd like to speak to Wes, please, about acquiring. So, so I bought this bullshit. And I did some tattoos on my friends, and one of them saw it and said, there's a job opening over at Inner City. And, you got to understand at the time, my attraction was to rough and tumble people. I wanted to be around the toughest people on the planet. And in tattooing, in my mind, I was like, Ron and Dave's, those are tough guys. Chris Lopez was a bad boy tattooer. And they were all connected to Rich Fye over there at R&D. And in my mind, I was like, yes, I have to be in this element. This is it. I'm not interested in the art school traditional tattooers. I want to be with the roughest dudes. And I fucking went. And, I showed him my garbage can portfolio, and I think that he was mostly impressed with the fact that I showed up to this place, because Elizabeth is real tough. It's a real tough town to be in. So he was like, shit, if she's going to show up, she's going to show up. And, we worked together for a little less than a year before we had one of those, I quit, you're fired moments. And, pretty much at that moment, I was like, well, I need to tattoo on the road. I was like, that's how I'm going to do this. And at that time, I had, formed some connections with Gilmani and Sarah Purr and Chu Garcia. So I was like, I'm out of here. I had a little stint at another shop in Queens, but it wasn't good. And I just bought a one-way ticket to Seattle, and I had probably about $500 or $600 to my name. And I went out there and I guested with Vivian Lazanga, and I had just hoped to have enough money to go to the next destination. And that's how I lived for a couple of months. I was just like traveling down the West Coast and tattooing. And I had only been tattooing 2 years, although I was telling people it was 5. It hadn't been that long. And, I guess, you gotta be savvy. You gotta, whatever, you gotta fake it till you make it. And I went down there, and at that time I was traveling by train. So I just had all my gear on my back, and there was no iPad then. It was crazy. I don't know. It was crazy what I was doing. But I had sat out there with Vivian for a while, and, of course, being in this traditional tattoo path that I was in, not only was my behavior encouraged, but it was rewarded. When I would show up to town and people would understand how much trouble I was going through to get there, I was welcomed with open arms, and it was like, okay, well, you probably want to see these acetates. You probably want to use these needles now. You probably want to use these colors. Let's teach you how to mix the colors. Let's teach you how to. So I did that for a couple of months, and then Rich Vi over at R&D caught wind of what I was doing and was like, if you really want to have a traditional tattoo experience, you need to work with Pete Giaquinto and Kubo over at Pete and Kubo's in Queens, which is the oldest tattoo shop in Queens. He's like, but you got to come home. You got to come back to New York. You can't, they're not going to deal with this bullshit with you just being on the road. So I came back and I got that job, and that was the big swing gate. Once that happened, I was working with Pete and Ronnie, and, I started forming these relationships with Kate Hellenbrandt and Jackie Gresham. And of course, through those relationships, I met Lyle, and, he became one of my best friends in tattooing and greatest influences. And when I think about all of these things that have gotten to me to where I am in my career, it is all surrounded by this ability to be very independent and be on the road. I actually don't think that you can, this statement may piss people off, but I don't think that you can be a proficient tattooer if you remain in one spot, providing someone is not getting an apprenticeship from Horiyoshi. I'm not talking about that one person. I think everybody else, I don't think that you can be in the company of one person, especially if we're talking about traditional tattooing. I think you need to get the story, because our tradition is so much based around oral tradition. It's not written down. It's not in books. I hear a lot of young tattooers be like, I don't know where to find it. Yes, you fucking do. You just need to go to the shop and go find out. And I suggest you do it quickly, because a lot of the pioneers of tattooing are dying. Within the course of 2 years, we lost Eddie and Moskowitz and Tuttle. And Boogs just passed away 3 days ago. What are you waiting for? The information is out there, but you have to leave and you have to be uncomfortable. And once you do that, I guarantee you come back as a better tattooer.
Yeah, I feel like any tattooer who even gets out a little bit, we all get these different opportunities. Someone invites you somewhere, or you have the chance to go to this place or to that place, and most people don't ever do that. So it's interesting to hear that the whole beginning of your path and your career, you just took every opportunity that you got and you rode it all the way back to where you started and got a job in Queens again. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's a very unique story, and not unique in many ways. Because the people who've taught me to tattoo, all of their stories are very similar, of being kind of transient people, especially someone like Lyle. Lyle, I don't think anymore, but, certainly in his time, he was the first tattooer to tattoo and be and visit on all continents. It was his life's work and journey to be an all over everywhere man. And that is why he was able to attain the status that he did in tattooing. And in my opinion, he is like the most valuable American traditional tattooer that exists in our modern age. And I'll fight somebody who would like to say differently than that.
Yeah, I've been having a growing interest in the way that tattooing has like mingled and interacted with popular culture over the years. So Lyle Tuttle is definitely one of those figures who really broke into like mainstream awareness for people. It makes me want to think about like more current examples of the way that happens, or does it even? Because tattooing is so common now that do you think that there's any parallels we could draw to now that are like these big public pop culture tattoo moments? Maybe like Post Malone or something. I don't know where else it would be.
I mean, so yeah, it's like that on crack now. Everybody, it's common knowledge that Collins hated Tuttle. He hated him because he did bring the outside world directly into tattooing. And not only, he did it shamelessly, he didn't care, and it was great. And so certainly that's happening now with just the massive amount of access people have to tattoo. I mean, literally you can open up your Instagram account and watch somebody do a tattoo from beginning to end. And often the gut feeling as a tattooer, especially for those of us who work very hard to attain that knowledge, is to be angry about it and be like, well, fuck that guy, fuck that lady, fuck that person. They're giving it away for free. They're ruining the tattoo. They're ruining it. It's burning. It's actually not burning. And it's actually fine, because if you do believe, like most of us do, that tattooing is something, it's a living, breathing thing, believing in the tattoo gods, then you have to also have faith and believe that it will keep who's supposed to be here and kick out who's not supposed to be here. You have to allow that space for people to come in and change it and do it their own way or be self-taught. Like, if you keep your head down and work hard and do what you're supposed to do, it's the main thing they teach you. Like, don't worry about what the fucking guy's doing down the street. So yeah, there's definitely parallels between, someone like Lyle, who was hated for what he did, but like, look what it did. 70 years later, here we are gathered in San Francisco at what was probably the greatest gathering of tattooers in modern history, at his, I don't even know what to call it, monumental art exhibit. We're all looking at all these things of tattooing that he's collected, the biggest collection in all of tattooing. And it's because this fucking guy kept his mouth open. That's how it happened. Like, let's be real about that. So I've given up on, this, it's going to happen. The internet makes everything smaller. So there's going to be that interconnectivity. Pop culture is going to be involved. I don't want musicians and athletes to stop getting tattooed, and people can keep tattooing on TV. That's fine. It makes me so much money that I refuse to complain about it. I'm not going to be on the TV, but people on the TV see tattoos and think they're cool, and then they come get them for me, and that's great. But yeah, I don't know. I'm all for whatever kind of progress tattooing is taking, because I've already staked my claim in where I want to be in tattooing, and I don't think that that's something that can be taken away. Like, the complaint about there being too much tattooers is dumb. It's fine. Like, let there be more tattooers. If you're such a badass, then it doesn't matter, right? Like, does it?
Well, so now to kind of go back to the importance that you stressed about traveling and experiencing stuff, which I definitely agree with. So we have that on one hand, and then on the other hand, there is all this access online, and you can watch people do tattoos, and you can learn so many things. So what do you think still makes it more special, or what do you think makes it important to still get out and experience these things firsthand? Like, what can you not get through the internet?
You can learn to bake a cake online, or you can learn to bake a cake from a really happy fat person. if you get it from the hearty, jolly cook, it's going to taste better. But the other person can still make a cake too. And maybe people like the way that cake tastes. And that's fine. And it's the same way with tattooing. I will always say that experience is always going to be the best teacher for tattooing. And especially because it is an oral history. With all of my mentorships that I've been lucky enough to have in tattooing, they have not only made my tattooing better, but they've made my ability to be a human being better, because, you know, tattooing is the great vaudeville act. You know, when you're in there, it's already this like big stage and this big show, and you do need to know how to perform not only on the skin, but, you know, face to face with people. That's something you can't really pick up the nuances of by watching, you know, somebody brat-tat-tatting on YouTube with some bullshit music playing in the background. Like, it's just not going to be the same thing. But you could still make a tattoo that way, and people are gonna go to that person. So it's really the choice. The choice is yours, Captain Planet. Like, do what you want to do. At this point, we're not doing tattoo a service.
I'm glad that there's all of it.
We're not doing a tattoo a service by breaking each other down.
And if the idea is only to like learn a thing and do the thing, that's kind of lame too, because tattooing's not like a soulless task. So it's, if you're really wanting to get an experience, to actually experience things, is to me the whole point of it.
Right.
Oh, let me ask you this. I know you spent a bunch of time with Lyle. Did he ever talk about like, I'm always curious, these people who become like icons of anything, in our case tattooing, these people who become these like pillars of a thing, did he ever acknowledge like the transition from just being like a person who tattooed to like being this elder statesman? And I'm sure people they just start to look at you differently at a certain point. And I'm always curious if people feel that, or if they acknowledge it or talk about it at all.
Well, he was very much aware of what people thought of him. And I think what people don't know is that he was a joker. He was as funny as any comedian that I've ever seen on TV. And he would often, I don't know how to say it, he would often play to the fact that people thought he was this like tattoo icon, because he thought of himself as a very regular person. And he would often say that he wasn't even 100% sure that he was deserved of all of the attention that he got. And he would always say that he wasn't the best tattooer in the world, but that he was proficient at following this like consistent line. He loved tattooing. He stayed in tattoo shops. He got tattooed. He just stayed in the game the longest. So he was aware of who people, I mean, and that's probably the best way to be, right? Like, you don't want to be this person. You don't want to be this diva and then want people to kiss your foot. He was the opposite of that. He was just a regular guy that was, as he would say, and fuck, it's hard to talk. It's so hard to talk about him because he's not here anymore. But he would just say that he was a lucky guy and he was in the right place at the right time. And those words always resonated with me, because I always felt like I was just this random person at the right place at the right time. And a lot of times tattooing saves people. This probably isn't the direction you wanted the interview to go, but that's one of the important things that he would always press upon me, that stay with me and make me feel very validated in my lifestyle. I think that's why we became such good friends. I know it always seemed weird that some 30-something-year-old woman was really good friends with this, 70-plus-year-old man. But it was because he had no idea that he was in an old man's body. He thought he was still 25. So it made sense, but he definitely never felt like he was as special as we all know him to be. And I have, and I don't know what to do with it. You could maybe help me with it. But, for a while I was doing that little podcast, and I did my interview with him probably about 8 weeks before he passed away. And then I stopped doing the interviews because I was so fucking sad. I didn't want to talk to anybody else. I was like, oh, that's all the information that's there. But I do feel like it's an interview that people should probably hear. So I don't know, maybe you could help me with that to try and get that out to the masses. But I would encourage anybody who is interested in tattooing at any level, whether you are self-taught or whatever it is, and no matter how you feel about traditional tattoos, because not everybody likes this fucking scene, that's for sure. I would encourage you to look into the things that Lyle has said and done in his life, because he literally left behind a blueprint of how to maintain a career for your entire life and die a really happy person in the end.
I was a fan of all those interviews that you were doing at that point. So I think being able to share that with people would be super interesting. And I hope that you can continue with that stuff, because I know that you've always been super interested in history and kind of peeling back the layers of stuff from the past, which I think is important. And I think you had a pretty cool lens on it. So yeah, let's wrap this up, because this connection is just awful and it's making me nuts. And I think it's making you nuts too. But I want to talk to you again. And then we can have a little more of a natural conversation. It's like we're talking to robotic versions of each other with this delay. So I don't want to waste any more good topics on on this quality of a call.
Some of it is usable, but obviously not. Yeah, we'll do it again. It's not a problem for me. I'm so honored to even be speaking to you that I was just willing to, go through the fire and the flame to do it. It's cool for me. And yeah.
Well, thanks. I'm honored that you did it. Another huge thank you to Sharky for being on the show this week. And if you want to check her stuff out on Instagram, you can head over to @BeforeTheWrathComes. And I will link to that so you don't forget. And if you want to check me out on Instagram, I am @AndrewStortz. And I want to thank you for joining me and sticking through this entire episode. If you like the show, I would please ask you to leave a rating and review on iTunes if that's where you're listening, or make sure you're subscribed or subscribe on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also subscribe, smash that like button, leave some nice comments, tell me what you thought about the episode, and I would really appreciate that. Other than that, let's wrap it up. Thanks again. I will see you all on the next episode of Books Closed.